Hello world, hello internet, and welcome to the 12th and last episode of the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. I am Valentin, your host. My host name is Frickler Handwerk, and this show is about people and stories from the Nix ecosystem. Today we will talk about stories that we tell through documentation, and this again warrants a little bit of a statement of conflict of interest. I also happen to lead the Nix documentation team, which I started more than a year ago, so I'm being paid for that through Tweak, which is sponsored by Antithesis, who are, in my opinion, generously supporting lots of activities in the Nix ecosystem. But from me here, you can expect more pointed, more informed questions. But if you have any questions about that or want to discuss this, you can reach me on GitHub, on the NixOS discourse, or Matrix. I definitely make mistakes. I am biased and I have my blind spots, so feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, I would like to remind our live audience to send us your questions, your comments, your thoughts from anywhere you're watching this, or on Matrix, or join the studio. You will find all the details on the NixOS discourse. Search for Nix Developer Dialogues, and I hope that you will get in touch. And now let's welcome our guest today, Alexander Groleau, known as Proof Construction. Welcome.
Hey.
Hi,
Good
Alex.
to be here.
Thank you very much for taking time. So, Alex, you have a background in mathematics, and it's reflected in your internet handle, Proof Construction. And although you touch computers for a living, you still publish academic papers. This year, you published one on document processing, something with computer vision. And you've been a long time Nix user, and this year became an active contributor by joining the, in my opinion, incredible group effort to improve Nix documentation. We'll talk about this in our topic, Grab a Shovel, the journey to better Nix documentation. And before we start, please tell us more about yourself by answering my now classic first and obvious question. Who or what got you into Nix, and why are you still here? What makes you stick?
Yeah, so it's hard to go back so far. My memory is like a goldfish, really. But I think I at some point got a little bit fed up with the daily life on like Ubuntu and Arch. And for so long, I was doing like IT support, kind of help desk kind of things. So life in the Windows world is incredibly painful as well. Um, Anytime you're fiddling with bits, it hurts a little bit, but yeah, reproducibility helps a lot. And then basically there were no platforms or tools that I was using that cared about this idea at all. So I was already a little bit interested in functional programming. Well, a lot interested in functional programming, but a little bit, I guess, on the periphery, I should say. And yeah, I don't even really remember what led me to Nix, but I think maybe it was one day I like ran a like a Pac-Man update on my Arch system and probably broke everything, and yeah, it's not good. So I got fed up, and now here I am. I began using NixOS just mostly for my work machine, and then you know I got a little bit hooked and started using it at home, and then I think it probably was less than a week before I pulling an all-nighter and like I need to really dig into the manual and figure out what's going on with this piece, and it's the rest is kind of history.
It all went on from there. So why,
Yeah.
of all things, did you join as a contributor to documentation? You could have been fixing anything with your background and skills.
Yeah, that's nice to say. It's nice to hear. I think I tend to, um, I think with my background and skills, I tend to find more problems than I can ever fix, and that's a suffering that I live with. Um, why join the documentation team? Yeah, so I think that there's a million reasons. I think like I don't like writing C++, so I don't work on the Nix code base. Every time I look into there, it's like that's what the real Hydra is. You can fix one thing, but there's three other problems. Um, I don't know. I couldn't really think of anywhere that would be better suited. And my background is also partly in teaching, so documentation is like very near and dear to me. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's been a little bit strange to like I don't know. Roll the dice is not the word I want to use, but to kind of go all in on a system that actually has famously bad documentation, and that's something of an interesting challenge, I think. And so here we are, and yeah, it's very hard to get rid of me.
That is true.
Although,
You're quite prototypical volunteer. As far as I can tell, no one's paying you for working on Nix. What makes you stick, and how do you sustain that?
yeah, that's also a very good question. Every day, at the end of a long sprint of working on Nix things, I ask myself the same question every time. Like, why? I could have gone outside and looked at trees or something instead of thinking about like syntax trees. But actually, that's probably not true. I would not be able to avoid this anyway. Um, why do it? Yeah, I want computers to be better. That's all. I find them, every time everyone who touches computers has a different experience, but I think so many of us in certain subsets of this field um, have a shared experience where there's a production outage caused by some update ran and now there's a dependency that's broken because the versions are mismatched or something like this, and we want to try and address this with Nix. I think the fundamental idea is very sound. It's a very good idea, and Nix is what we have for an implementation against this original idea. So it's almost like it's not that Nix is even special in my mind. It's just like the only option at this point.
But
But it's also very special
there
for
are
this
things
reason.
like geeks, right? There are things like geeks. There are other
Yeah,
programs.
there is Geeks. Um, and actually, I did use Geeks for some time, and I'm pretty sympathetic. I actually really enjoy Lisp. I think it's a fun way to write programs. It's like it just has a nice flavor. Um, but I think in my heart and in my mind, I'm really at the core like a Haskell kind of person. So the Nix flavor matches what I think. I think a lot more, and
There
so
are
I
some
am here.
patterns. There are some patterns emerging with my guests here. So many of them are either active in the Haskell community or active Haskell users. And Nix maintainers last time talked about discipline and structure and like beauty of ideas. Is that something that also resonates with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can see this from my stupid vanity handle, right? Um, the idea that we can sort of pre-compute some information about the world is very satisfying. I think that's a very attractive idea for me. Like we can maybe even prove something in advance and know that something will work. And we hope that this is true for Nix. I'm not entirely certain. I'm not convinced that it is indeed true in every case. But maybe we can talk about my crazy scheme to teach everyone formal methods before they get onboarded or something like this.
Yeah, as you already hinted at, teaching and learning is definitely a vital component to documentation, generally dealing with computers and obviously mathematics. But maybe slight tangent. As a volunteer, do you think that contributing to open source is also a boost to career opportunities? Does that help? Does working with Nix on your free time help you get a job or doing your job?
I don't know if I can say anything about helping get a job. Um, I think Nix has certainly helped me like in jobs. I think almost in some sense more than anything else, except for sort of like Linux itself in a general sense. Um, and I suppose like automation as an abstract idea. Yeah, like part of why I've been so absent from the documentation team for the past few weeks is like I've been really deep in the mines, setting up routers with NixOS and experiencing tremendous pain and also tremendous pleasure. It's great. So now I'm happy to say that we have a couple of NixOS routers running in production, and yeah. So to that end, I guess for that reason, yeah, Nix has been incredibly helpful. Um, Instead of spending $20,000 or $30,000 on some firewall hardware from some commercial vendor and plus license costs and on, I just like I put like $1,000 off the shelf mini PC at each site, and they're connected nicely with WireGuard, and everything's great. And if it breaks, then I'll just I have my NixOS ISO like on my USB stick, and I'll just plug it in and make another one, plug it right in, and I have confidence that it'll work. and I won't need to call Cisco or someone and sit on the phone for 8 hours while we have fires going.
Cisco salespeople right now not happy listening to this.
No, that's okay. They should please reach out to me after the show, because we have a lot to talk about, actually.
Yeah, we also think we have a lot to talk about in terms of like understanding what the system is doing, because this is something that with closed source, with proprietary software, is generally hard. Before we get more into that, I have another question. What is it that you're doing on the documentation team when you're not absent and spending all-nighters on setting up routers for your company?
I'm sorry to say, I think most of my effort on the documentation team is bothering people about grammar, or like trying to turn a sentence that has too many clauses into 3 sentences of smaller clauses. Sometimes it feels like just like rules lawyering with language, but really somehow we're all programmers, so this is actually, that's all we do anyway.
I was already about to ask, isn't that what we're doing anyway?
Yeah. So yeah, on the documentation team, I think my focus so far has been, I think, the onboarding process. Like, there's, I think, like so many people, maybe the majority, this is reflected in the Nix community survey that I'm always like a week too late to take every year. The majority of the Nix users are actually like NixOS users that are sort of self-described Linux enthusiast people. We've discussed this. And like so many of them, that's how I got here. And it was challenging. It's quite painful in some ways to try and do something that, I mean, it's 6-7 years ago now. This is also a lot different than today, but the onboarding process was not so smooth, and it was not really clear for me how to contribute in any meaningful way. And while it's totally fine to sort of just use the tools that are provided to you, um, I'm a tinkerer. I'm also a fickler, and yeah. So I wanted to start like building something and contributing back, and yeah, it seemed like the most natural place to start working on this, actually, is to work on documentation around getting sort of new users to become new contributors, so that we can have a circular economy and sustain this project in the future. Um, it's sort of always shocking, I think, for people to learn that, Nix, the idea, is at least 20 something years old, and probably the idea is longer, much longer than that, but since the thesis anyway. And sort of, it's amazing that we have what we have today, but also it's amazing for, like, in a good way and in a bad way, because there's so much interest, and yet there's so many places where it's easy to find a place where you can point and say, oh, it's like a deficient here. Why does this piece not work so well? And then but then
Or
it's
how does
also,
it even work?
yeah, how does it even work?
What
And
does it
then
even do?
that's a completely different problem. If you try and go look into that, it might not even be possible at the for the person who's trying to investigate this at the time and the place where they're trying to do this. It may not be possible for them to actually comprehend what's happening, not because of any failure on their part, but because there's just no documentation, or the docs are often wrong or completely outdated, or all of these problems. Um, or they got into a situation where they prevented their machine from ever getting network access again, which I managed to do last week. So it's not even possible to learn. Yeah.
Although I had the same situation just a couple of days ago, and it's very easy to get out of it with NixOS. So we'll definitely talk more about quality of documentation, why it is the way it is, and what to do about it. Let me remind the audience to ask your questions. You probably have some about Nix documentation, because it's been a sore point in the ecosystem. We all know this. I also read discourse, and there are up-to-date comments about like documentation sucks. Still. So so you're not alone on the documentation team. I also not alone on the documentation team. It's a group effort. How many people are there? What are they doing? How do you collaborate?
Yeah. So the docs team is, its size is very hard to pin down. The team is a little bit ephemeral in many ways. Like they're kind of there's a core few contributors like yourself and Sylvan and some others, Robert and so on, and then there's sort of this cloud, or I'll call it. I'm thinking like of Jupiter or something in my head. Like there's this dense iron core, and then the rest of us are just kind of flying around. And sometimes we make contact and like write
Exchange
something, make a PR.
radiation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, depending on the situation, we get closer or further away. Depending, like I've been a little bit further for the past month or so. Um, I totally forgot the question.
How many are you, and how do you collaborate, being this
Ah,
type of vaguely defined cloud?
yeah, so the structure sort of lends itself, or maybe I should say lack of structure, lends itself well, I think, to the kind of asynchronous, distributed, open source way of doing things. So I think for the most part, we tend to collaborate like asynchronously, and I mostly will like review a PR here and there when like I don't know, it's 2 in the morning and my phone wakes me up because it dings with a GitHub email, and like, oh, I should really check on this. Maybe I have a few minutes before I fall asleep. um, and then it turns out it's like 6 hours before I can fall asleep because there's just so much writing to do. But yeah, so I think we kind of tend to contribute this way, and collaborate this way. Someone will put up a PR, and unfortunately, too often the PR goes like sort of unseen for a bit, or unattended to. But this is something I think we can easily work towards addressing in the future. Um, it's very interesting actually. Like my experience, and this is maybe a partial answer to a previous question, what brought me to the docs team and why am I still here and so on. um, the docs team somehow works together in a way that oftentimes in the moment it feels a little bit unproductive, but I actually feel like we're incredibly productive given the constraints that we have, and everything going on in everyone's personal lives and things like that. Somehow it's a lot more productive doing documentation as the task than other teams I've worked in where everyone's getting paid for this purpose. um, so it's a strange duality here.
What is it that went well? So what did change since you arrived on the scene? I mean, you arrived, as I understand it, for the very reason that stuff was a pain to work with.
Yeah, I think once everything is very easy for everyone, then I'd be very happy to stop doing this and do something else. But I don't see that point coming for a long time. So there's plenty of work to do. Um, I lost the question. I'm sorry.
So what went well? What changed since you arrived?
Oh yeah. So I think when I joined a little bit after the learning journey working group was formed, I think, and maybe a few months, or I don't even really remember the timeline. But that was very appealing for me, so I wanted to join that pretty quickly and see what we could do to help like write some initial tutorials that people can read when they're coming into the ecosystem. And I think that again, with the difficulties of coordination in an asynchronous and open source kind of way, I think that that team accomplished a great deal, really. And like the changes that have come from the docs team to Nix.dev just in maybe 9 months, or 9 months, something like that, have been really staggering. Since the beginning of the year, we've accomplished. Let's see. There's like now you can follow my guide to, or tutorial to, packaging existing software. If you have a C or C++ library or whatever you need. Um, Assuming you can still find something that's not packaged in Nix packages, which is increasingly rare. Um, then let's see. There's like the language tutorial has come a long way. I think it's a lot more concise and a lot easier, I think, as a single page kind of resource than a lot of other things out there. Um, One thing that is hard to see as well, or it's less sort of visually obvious, and takes a lot more working and reading and kind of thinking to understand, is like, I want to say about a year and a half, 2 years ago, sort of the official docs have the flavor of them reflects the kind of contribution style of the history. So it really, in many different places, reads like different people have been writing it, and they have completely different ideas about what to do and why to do it and how you can do it, and so on. And I think at least in Nix.dev, the sort of the narrative structure and the kind of the author voice, I should say, is much more cohesive at this point. And I think really you're largely to thank for this. And this is also unfortunately like it contributes to so many hours of like the language lawyering behavior, and this is a turnoff for so many. But I think it's very important to do. It helps the docs flow and makes it a lot easier to consume them. And this, in turn, we hope makes it a lot easier to become both a user and a contributor and so on.
Yeah,
So
speaking
good
of that,
things.
speaking of that, we did have quite a bunch of churn in the past year. We had members come and go. One reason was that we did have a lot of discussions about how to approach things, because, so in my opinion, we just had real problems with how to structure things to begin with. Can you tell maybe something more about this learning journey working group that you referenced in the beginning? How did that come into being?
The history of this, I'm a little unclear. This is something I'll have to defer to Zach Mitchell. I think, as I understand it, this was sort of his baby for a while, and I think that the purpose of this team was really or this working group within the docs team, was to smooth out the sort of the first steps into the waters of Nix, or maybe the ocean at this point. It's kind of difficult. I think a lot of people who are self-described Linux enthusiasts, or maybe are not, but they are software engineers by trade or something like this, or sort of just computer nerds, maybe more generally. It's very easy to bounce off of Nix. Like it's extremely easy nowadays to find Nix, to kind of come across it. You know, it's on Hacker News or Lobsters or all these different kind of link aggregators all the time. And like our NixOS subreddit is quite big, actually, like two or 300,000 people or something like that. It's probably not that big.
I think it's 18,000.
18,000. Okay, yeah. So I'm only off by a huge, massive amount. Whatever. But yeah, it's somehow it's like a very vocal group of people that are interested in this and kind of talking about it. And there's also a very vocal group of people who don't like it, and that also is bad press is good press in a sense, at least here. So it's sort of very easy to find Nix, to stumble upon it, to sometimes trip over it. But then how do you get from there to using it, either in happiness or in anger? Like that is the goal of the learning journey working group. It's historically, if you wanted to get onboarded, basically you'd have to read some blog posts, and if you're a very unlucky soul, like more than 2 years ago or so, you'll just try to read the NixOS manual, and good luck. Yeah. So this team attempts to kind of smooth and in many ways alleviate the pain points here, and I think it's done great.
Okay, and those tutorials that you mentioned, they came out of the learning journey working group as part of an arduous process of discussing how to approach things, because many things were simply not clear even to us as long-term users. How do you actually do these things, right?
Can you say a little bit more? I think I have an idea of what you're saying.
Yeah, we were debating how to approach like general patterns, such as how to structure shell.nix file, or what are the patterns to package a project. How do you approach different things? We had a lot of debate about that.
Yeah, so this, as with sort of everything else in the kind of formal language sphere, there's we write these languages so that we can pin something down, but then the fact is that it just pushes all the ambiguity outside, and then we have these like sort of design structural decisions of they're more or less like personal flavor, I guess. Like how do you do you write a package as like a recursive function, or like do you put the final keyword in there, or like there's all these different pieces that flow. How we settle on these it's really a matter of debate. I don't think that we have any solution in a general sense. Like we just discuss, and sometimes we lightly argue, and it's good natured, but there's I think maybe I should say that the product of all of this work is the product of sort of the tension of disagreement in many cases, and I believe it's better for that. But yeah, I don't even know if I answered any of the question at this point.
Definitely. I mean, from my perspective, I think we're lucky to have like veterans like Sylvan and Robert on board
Yes.
to help us with these things, because they've just seen so many parts of the ecosystem, and we've had talks with them for a good reason, because they just know these things. And yes, still the ecosystem is so large, it's often hard to figure even very basic things out, and now we want to pin them down, as you say. What about this? Actually, you mentioned earlier that there's a challenge to understand what's going on, and there's this temptation to learn more and understand more. And as tinkers and curious minds, we kind of get into rabbit holes quite easily. What's the aspect of learning and teaching for you in contributing and working on documentation?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? My mind is full of thoughts. I'm going crazy.
Yeah, let's get out the ambiguity and narrow down.
Yeah.
What makes this work on documentation for you so interesting in terms of learning or teaching? Because you do have experience with teaching from your math career.
Yep.
And obviously learning.
Yes, I tend to find that I cannot avoid learning in many cases, and somehow Nix, the whole ecosystem of Nix allows for it's probably sub-exponential, but it's fast enough growth and kind of variation in how things are done that there's somehow always more to learn and more to read and more to think about, and it's very satisfying from that perspective. I think it's sort of strange. Like if you stay in a little corner of Nix, then it's easy to think that maybe everything is just like this. But in fact, it couldn't even be further from the truth. Like if all you've ever done with the Nix kind of ecosystem is you've run NixOS on some personal machines, or maybe even in production somewhere with some like revenue generating workloads, or maybe in my case revenue losing workloads. Then you're not going to really be exposed at all to this kind of the architectural concerns inside Nix packages, or like the fact that just even within Nix packages, the Haskell community writes Nix completely different than the Python community, such as it is, and then this is very different still from the C community, and so on. And this is not even to mention like sort of what I consider like even more esoteric languages like Crystal or whatever. You have very strange kind of patterns inside this, and somehow the product of all of these things just in the same bucket is like nearly limitless complexity and stuff to just sink your teeth into on an intellectual level.
Is this something that crushes down on you if you're trying to condense that for onboarding for beginner documentation?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's I think maybe this is one of the biggest problems we've had to try and address, or the biggest challenges to address maybe on the docs team is how do you provide a single like tight pathway that's kind of hard to stray from. The second you stray off the path, you're in the deep forest and
more or less lost on your own.
Yeah, hard to know what's going to happen to you. We have some idea, but yeah, how long it will take for you to find civilization again is up for grabs, really. And this actually is what happened to me.
Sylvan is paving those roads through the jungle.
Yeah. Sylvan is a hero. He's putting the torches down in the forest for us, so we can at least look for the light. It's good. Yeah.
Let's speak more about challenges. So what is it that the documentation team is currently concerned with? What's on your mind in terms of how are you going to figure that out? You talked about structure. Maybe let's start with structure.
Yeah, so we've done some kind of wide scale changes, I think, to the visual and logical architecture of Nix.dev in the past few months. So there's some changes in this way of like what exactly is the path that people should take, and sort of if Nix.dev is going to be the entry point at some higher level, then what should people see there? There's some sort of structural concerns around this. The docs team, I think, is partly because of this like gas cloud behavior. I think we're thinking a lot these days about how to get more funding so that we can address the docs problems in maybe a more maybe really a more aggressive way, basically. You can see this all over Nix, not just in the docs team or the documentation effort, even outside of the team, but there's so much interest and indeed so much commercial interest, and yet it's somehow hard to find money to throw at people. And if you can't do that, then it's just it's very difficult to find time to contribute to something where, as we've said, the boundaries, not the boundaries, the barriers to entry are oftentimes at least perceived as very high and very, very difficult to kind of surmount. So these are kind of concerns that we're thinking of. We're thinking of things in both in terms of how do we onboard people better still, and always kind of refining iteratively this, or I should say recursively, this process. Although I'm not certain that we'll ever find a fixed point.
We've made a verge.
We may diverge. It's okay. And you see that everywhere, right? That's why we still have questions on Nix.dev about what's going on with the NixOS wiki, which we do not control.
Yeah, so what is going on with the NixOS wiki?
That's a great question. And I wish if there's anyone in the audience who knows what's going on with the NixOS wiki, please drop a comment. Somehow the nixos.wiki, this unofficial site, has accumulated so much I don't want to call it esoteric, although there is certainly a lot of esoteric knowledge there. But it's sort of like a dumping ground for folklore, I should call it, about Nix and NixOS and Nix packages and everything in the ecosystem. And somehow there's a perception that if you need to find something, you can probably find it there. And that may not be untrue, although it's not clear that you're going to find what you thought you would find. You may find something that's 6 years old, for example, and hasn't been applicable for 4 years. And it's a bit of a wasteland and a graveyard of ships, in a sense, in my mind. It's like so there were clearly some beautiful structures attempted, and it's a graveyard.
I think that the reason why people stumble over it is that it's just much more prominent in search engine results.
Yeah, for sure. I say all of this with love. Like I think any documentation effort by anyone is always welcome to me. Especially in the age of large language models, there can never be enough human-generated text on the internet, for sure. But yeah, I think a lot of people trip over this. They come looking for information about Nix, and they find certainly some information about Nix, but how it sits in the history and where it is relative to the modern things that they will be using is not so clear on the wiki. So keeping Nix.dev up to date is also a concern, and I think you can kind of see this in our discussions internally, anyway, in the docs meetings. The way that we
which are public, of course. So
they're public, yeah. Yes, and anyone who is interested, please drop in. You're welcome to grab a shovel. But yeah, so you can see this in our discussions about down to how do we even phrase things in the prose. Like we oftentimes try to take sort of a rhetorical stance where it's not so suggestive of things that haven't been documented elsewhere in the same website. Because if you try and go looking for this information and you don't find it on nix.dev, now we have somehow no control over what you're actually going to find, or if you will even find something. And so, yeah, there's kind of structural concerns on this level, as well as sort of, I would call them maybe human resources concerns. Like the team is constrained just simply by not having enough people. There's never enough human energy to throw at these problems. Although I think the team also has like a fantastic amount of energy when we do kind of bump in the night. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is this? What is it with these complexities? Can the team even manage that? So you said there are dependencies such as on reference documentation, which is oftentimes incomplete. Although I'm personally working on the Nix manual, I know that the Nix package manual is an order of magnitude larger. What about the other things? Like how does the team deal with that, and is it capable of addressing these problems?
I think the capability question is certainly a firm yes. The skill is there to do these things, but the time is simply not there. Um, there's only so many human workable hours in the day, and although many people seem to have somehow like superhuman effort and productivity, they're still just single people, and we're talking about a team that's including contributors that we haven't even seen in a year. The team is less than 20, 30 people. So there's really just only so much you can possibly do. And so for example, like the Nix manual is, I think, doing a lot better than it was 3-4 years ago. The Nix packages manual has also come a long way, but NixOS manual not seeing any love. It's kind of like the forgotten child in a way, and I think this is actually maybe a call to action for everyone in the audience and everyone at home. Like, so many people, and again, this is reflected in the community survey, so many people get here through NixOS. Like, we need help so that we can get more people to work on the NixOS manual, so that more people can come in and we can just keep doing this forever. I believe that we're coming to the end of 2023. If we can get this effort going very seriously in the first half of 2024, and we can continue it through to the end of the next year to this time, like, we can get the NixOS manual to be like up to par, I think, with the other two manuals within this time frame. And my hope is that by 2030, every Linux install in the world will be NixOS.
Right before the end of the Unix epoch.
Yes, just in time.
Just in time for the end of the world. Well, let's talk more later about how to contribute, because that's definitely an interesting topic.
Sure.
I hope many people will be interested in helping out. What's the situation with the NixOS manual? Why does the team does not address these things if you say most users are actually NixOS users rather than pure Nix users, say?
Yeah, I think maybe this really reflects the backgrounds of the team. Everyone, to my knowledge, is at least some flavor of like software developer or adjacent to this. While I think the incidence of people being both like software developer or adjacent and sort of devout Linux users, or devout is a little bit too religious, but dedicated in some way, it is much less, maybe. So I think a lot of the people on the team, while they've been using Nix for a year or two, or many years even, many don't use Linux machines day to day, and or if they do, it's purely like a service bearing virtual machine or container or something like this. And so NixOS, while of course it's incredibly useful in those contexts as well, sort of doesn't get the love that a daily user of NixOS would want to give, I guess.
I'm pretty sure Sylvan and me are daily users of NixOS, and so is Robert. But
yes,
yeah,
of course, but you're only the 3 people,
that's
and
not
if we can
everyone.
clone you, then we'll have a different discussion. But there's not enough. How much can you do? And sort of this also is a little bit reflective of this somewhat explicit hierarchy between the components of like the core project, right? Like, Nix is the foundation of everything, and then Nix packages is built with this, and then actually, I think this fact is not internalized even much among the community yet, but NixOS is really sort of a domain-specific language inside the Nixish language that Nix packages uses, and it's somehow it's much more abstract and also much more concrete. It's hard to describe really what I mean by that, but somehow in any direction you look, NixOS is just always further away, and because it builds on so much that comes before, I think really there's just a lot of energy in wanting to get those foundations right. Um, yeah.
Again, some inclination of the mathematical mindset, I suppose, and the software development engineering mindset. Let me right. We wanted to say to talk about contributions. How can people
Sure.
help with changing that? So apparently, there's so much energy in using NixOS or in like liking or trying to like or love NixOS. How can people help making that part of the ecosystem better? Or anything
Yeah.
really, because
So
the documentation team does need help with all the other things as well.
we certainly do. It really, not just documentation. Every team needs help. But of course, if you want to, for anyone listening out there who wants to be sort of involved in another team, I urge you, I beg you, I'm pleading with you to at least write some comments and send them our way so we can contribute as well. We can all work together.
So how to help with NixOS specifically? Because
Yeah. So how?
there's such a vacuum there, apparently.
So there's a million ways to contribute. Um, Probably the easiest way is to, if you want to help on NixOS documentation specifically, you could go to the github.com/nixos/nix.dev, and then search the pull requests that are open. I think there's still a few PRs open against like NixOS specific topics. I saw some emails about NixOS virtual machines, and I didn't really read them. I'm sorry, but so certainly there's some PRs that need review, and the review, maybe this seems a lot. How should I call it? It seems a little bit maybe difficult if you're not familiar with the sort of the kind of GitHub contributor workflow. But really, it's as easy as like making an account and going and like adding a comment, just to say what you thought when you read some piece, and that actually is a tremendous help actually already. So that I really almost encourage everyone to do this. You can just make a drive-by comment and tell us what you think, and it's a lot easier to, if we collect these things in the PR comments or into GitHub issues comments and these threads, um, we get a better idea of what everyone's thinking. So I think everyone can make a contribution that's very powerful that way, without having to write any code or without having to like dedicate time to revising and kind of re-architecting even an entire section of a manual or the entire manual. Um, so that's probably the best way to start. We could jump through some of that a little bit later. We can do a little contributor workflow, or
Oh,
we can do
let's
that
do
now,
it
I
right
suppose.
now because we're slowly running out of time. Maybe show us what would be the entry point to help contributing. We have the
Sure.
contribution guide on Nix.dev. Share a screen.
Let me share my screen here. We'll see if it actually works. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to GitHub, NixOS, nix.dev, not Nix packages. Sorry, I'm using a browser I don't normally use.
Probably have to increase
Is
your
this still
font
visible?
size. Yeah, you have to increase your font size.
Yes. Is that much better? Okay, so we have like some pull requests, so we can just search for NixOS. And yeah, so let's see what we'll have. Unfortunately, everything will have NixOS because indeed everything is under the NixOS organization. So maybe we'll just look for something like module. Documentation refactor. This is not going to be so useful this way. That's okay. Let's let's look at contributing to the Nix packages tutorial. This is a relatively new PR. And so this one actually is a follow-on of a guide that I began, or a tutorial I began, which grew out of another tutorial that I wrote. And so I just basically never got enough time to finish this up and kind of check in some of these comments and so on. We had a little bit of discussion here. And so rather than let my PR continue to sort of like languish without attention, this relatively new contributor just joined and made a PR against this, and has tried to kind of help out. So they've changed some things around a little bit. They did a little restructuring here. So they moved this piece out of where it was and put it into a new sort of top, parent directory. And actually, I'm not even sure if I agree with this. So I just reviewed this yesterday or something. So we're going to have some discussion about this in the future.
More discussion, yes.
More discussion. Here we go. So here's something that's a good example that's sort of really indicative of what people could do if they want to contribute. Like this person suggested that we add this this line 140 here. And line 140 is actually like 3 sentences. And we just have a sort of a style guide or a contributing guide. There's a little section in there, one of these 2 guides, that basically we want to maintain a rule where in the markdown source, 1 sentence per line should be what we do, because this makes diffs much easier to read when we have to make changes like this. So for new contributors, maybe you can just find some places like this to sort of change things around very simply, like click in here and then hit enter. So we can separate these sentences out. And then later when we want to kind of rules lawyer the language of them again, we can do that easier with better diffs. And then again, yeah, fixing typos. Like we're all human, we make typos all the time. I did sort of the same thing here, and I think in here as well. And sort of just some language changes, like instead of discussing, that we in this guide we complete a Nix build and we find the result symlink. So I think we want to say something that it is indeed a symlink, and then rather than saying like we're going to run this as a sanity check, it's good practice to confirm that your program runs before you submit this to Nix packages. So the contributors, actually, you don't need to work very hard. You just kind of need to think about how to say things. And actually, maybe this is actually hard work, but it's certainly easier than a lot of other things you could do. So this is a great way to contribute.
Yeah, and Sylvan will probably chip in that we definitely also need help with more automation, because many of these rules can indeed be automated, but we're so focused on editorial work because there's so many things to decide and figure out that we barely have any time. Yeah, so what's the target audience of that documentation? Is it just for everyone? Is it really for the average Linux enthusiast, or is there a particular focus that the team is taking right now?
I think it's really very broad, the target audience. I'm not even convinced that actually that you need to know anything about software development, or you don't even, I think in our minds, maybe we're really writing for kind of the sort of someone who doesn't even know anything about computers. Maybe this is something I'm putting onto it, but I think there is certainly this goal, at least among some of us, that sort of the documentation should eventually become accessible to someone who this is their first foray into computing as a sort of discipline. It should become accessible to these people if possible. And yeah, there's some disagreement on what to do there. But I think overall, we're always trying to push the documentation like towards becoming more understandable by people with less context, and sort of more cohesive and requiring less, less consulting of secondary materials or third-party materials in many cases, which has been sort of the way that Nix's documentation has kind of lived for 10 or more years now. It's so often the best material is in a blog post from 2017 or something. And trying to rework the same information and fit it into a narrative is mostly what we do these days.
Here's a comment from Ivan to address what you've been talking about, that we did a few things. Guys, what you did so far in the docs team already improved the situation significantly. Of course, there's work to be done, but it is day and night difference already. Great. Thanks for all your work. And
thank you.
I think I will not pronounce this correctly. Karthikeya is writing, you guys are great, made a wonderful operating system. We definitely did not make that. That was Armin Hamel in 2006 and a few others. But yeah, I recommend you to watch the other episodes about a little bit of the history and context on NixOS. Speaking of, there's a lot to be done. What exactly is there to be done apart from giving the NixOS manual more love and making the overall narrative, the learning journey, more cohesive, coherent? What else is on the horizon? What would you like, in fact, to see in the next couple of years?
In the next couple of years, that's a very kind of a far timeline. I would love to see more information about, or sort of more information for contributors that have never contributed to any open source project at all. So things like, this probably won't fit in Nix.dev. I think we've actually discussed this maybe a year ago or something like this, but this is things like how to be a good kind of GitHub citizen and having like somewhat decent Git hygiene. I'm very guilty of not having this. These kinds of things, like how do you kind of use the tools that make this work possible? I would love to see more about that, and I think I really would love to see, and I don't want to commit to anything, but I would love to maybe work on and make some sort of documentation for onboarding people to thinking somewhat more formally about these kinds of topics. So much of the computation just being done in general, but also kind of in the specific sort of like Linux sphere and in build tooling and kind of propping up the development of the systems that eventually people will use. It's I don't really know even what to call it. It's very pre-theoretical and very it's hacks. Everything is just hacks on hacks. And I do believe very strongly that eventually we can find our way out of this, and we can kind of develop and articulate some idea of how to do things much more cleanly and somehow much more logically. And this will, I think, have huge impacts across the entire ecosystem. Nix in NixOS and Nix packages, etc., are all, I think, very appealing to me from the beginning because functional programming is very appealing to me because it's sort of amenable to, sort of a formal understanding of these things. You can trace the composition of the functions and imagine at the end what should come out. And indeed, but hopefully it does. Not always, but there's more structure there that you can rely on beyond just you run some commands and you hope that your mental model of the state of the world is indeed the state of the world, and that's not enough, I think. And there's billions of dollars every year are poured into trying to address this problem, but maybe hundreds of dollars every year are poured into trying to address it from a sort of formal standpoint. And I claim that if they were reversed, we would be much better off. So this is where I would like to see the future go.
Yes, as humanity. What does that sounds a little bit like the documentation team would be shaping the ecosystem, which I think we're certainly not doing. We're just trying to figure out how to do things with what's there. And there's been a little bit of controversy around the documentation team. There were questions: why is the documentation team only document stable interfaces, as opposed to, say, the Flakes experimental feature, which is very popular, as we can always also see from the community survey. Why is that?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. And I think there's no single definitive answer that captures everything. There's so much nuance here. Like the project Nix, generally speaking, is huge. There's maybe 10, 15,000 people are interested in this and actively using it. And everyone has different reasons that they're doing so. Also, at the same time, one of maybe the best kept secrets, it's not a real secret, it's kind of an open fact if you look, but it's not obvious and not really discussed, is that all of this, it's kind of this shining city on the hill that we're trying to build, is sustained in large part by the effort of maybe 50 or 60 people, maybe 100. And they're really like doing some heroic work for the rest of us to kind of take advantage of. And all of this kind of leads to significant coordination difficulty. So we have a lot of kind of sections of the ecosystem that are growing in different ways and for different reasons and under different circumstances. And I think like the Flakes kind of evolution um, is a symptom of that, maybe. Symptom sounds a little bit too clinical, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, to use the evolution kind of metaphor, Flakes is but one possible evolution of pre-Flakes Nix. And so, yeah, so coordinating all of this growth is an extreme challenge. Um, and as for why we don't on the docs team document these kinds of things, like the target is moving, and that's always difficult for documentation to begin with. But in this case, we have like 1,000 targets, and they're all moving really fast, and we're like 10 people, so it's simply not possible to do so much. And sort of from a pedagogical standpoint, also, like there's some, maybe this deserves discussing actually on its own. There's some idea maybe among, I'll call them like the Nix lay people, that like Flakes is an entirely new Nix, but it's not. It's really Nix under the hood, although Flake.nix is not really Nix. But yeah, so I think there's some difficulty where we don't want to start people off too far ahead because they don't have the foundation to understand what they're doing. And that is very much the current situation. And this fact is reflected very much in discussions around this piece.
Okay, so a strong motivation to help people understand what the hell they're even doing. Last question from the audience by Danielle. Based on personal anecdata, there's a large Nix user base in countries like Germany and France. How would you invite other developers that might not have a complete hold of English to contribute to the docs with, for example, a tutorial?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question. I hope that in the future, in the coming years, we'll see a lot more kind of locally centric user groups of not Linux, of NixOS and of Nix. So just recently, some team has been kind of convened of people who are interested in this idea to bring a NixCon to North America. And so that was recently announced. I hope to see some people there. I'm going to try and make it down in Southern California. And Southern California, of course, is a very large Spanish-speaking community. So I really hope that we can get some some Nix Espanol. And yeah, from personal experience, spending some time over in China in the past few years, there's actually a very large community of Nix users in China, or quite large community of Nix users in China. Hey, I'm getting a call from Spain right now. There's a large community of Nix users in China. There's very little, if any, communication between them and us, and sort of for like political and social reasons, like GitHub being less accessible and the Great Firewall posing some kind of connectivity concerns and stuff. There's just not much interfacing there, but I'm confident that we can bridge this gap eventually. It's going to take some serious work. But the good news is, like at least for those of us like English speakers, Chinese is actually easier than Nix. It's a joke. It's a joke. They're both quite difficult, but yeah.
At least we can figure it out next. Yeah, we can help with that.
Yeah. No, the good news is that we all have the same kind of motivations. The reasons for people coming to these things, while the set of reasons is very large, they're all kind of shared between everyone. Doesn't matter the language you speak. But yeah, I certainly agree. There's certainly some significant work that must be done on the docs side to translate these things into other languages. And to some extent, there's a little bit of, I feel and hear some rumblings in that direction. Like yourself, actually, Valentin, you have your like computing from the ground up book that you'd like to push forward on.
I would like, but that's a story for a different time. By which I mean the time's up for today. Sorry for we could do this for hours, and we're sometimes doing this for hours. If you want to be part of it, please join the documentation team. We'll be like rambling on as far as much as we want. Thank you very much, Alex, for being here today. Thank you everyone for watching. this was the last episode of the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. Alex, I'll give you a second to say bye and put you off the stage.
Just put me off the stage. For anyone who is interested in anything that we've talked about today, like I would love to see you at the next Docs team meeting. Even if you decide that you don't want to join indefinitely, it's just good to see a new face, and it's good to get kind of fresh perspective. And it always helps. It always helps to see new people and get your energy, sort of a vampiric treatment of contributors. But it's great to have you. So please come and join us.
Thank you very much, Alex. So I would like to thank, at the end of the series, I would like to thank everyone who took the time and the courage to be my guest on this show. Special thanks to Brian and Rock from the Nix marketing team for helping with setting up the technical infrastructure, dealing with the social media channels, and advertising the show. Also, thank you very much to Danielle from the documentation team for helping with background research and collecting the links to topics that we've been talking about. We will post more of them as we go. Also, thanks to the many companies, the decision makers who believe in and invest in open source and help make Nix and other things a reality. We've been talking about some of them on this show. And of course, great many thanks to the NGI program managers, to the people from NLNet and the NixOS Foundation who made Summer of Nix and this show a reality, who made it possible. And certainly without your support, none of this would have happened. And the real heroes, though, are you, the people, the contributors, the maintainers who work on open source around the globe, around the clock, to make computers work for everyone, regardless of their background and income. Thank you very much. Please continue, have fun, and hopefully maybe conquer the world with Nix, using Nix. The next Summer of Nix will come next year, so stay tuned. And until then, you can follow or become part of the NixOS community, the Nix community on nixos.org. The action is happening on the NixOS discourse and GitHub and a few other places. So see you there on the internet. And now let's everyone grab a shovel and get back to hacking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.